All right, Tara, if you just want to let me know when you think it's good, when we've got everybody in, and we'll go ahead and get started. Good to go? Okay. All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Liz Rutledge. I'm the Director of Wildlife Resources at the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. So I just want to thank you all for attending tonight's webinar, which is part of the 15 webinar series, Learn to Deer Hunt. The series offers a dynamic lineup of presentations and materials curated by the New Hill Hunter Education and Mentoring Program, which covers a wide variety of topics to guide new deer hunters from pre-season scouting all the way to deer processing. The series is hosted and moderated by the North Carolina Wildlife Federation in conjunction with its South Wake Conservationists chapter. And all right. So I will just take a few minutes to provide you with a little bit of background on NCWF programming that's related to R3, which is retention, recruitment, and reactivation, which is all related to conservation and hunting. And all right. So on this slide here, you'll see a little bit about some of the programming that the Wildlife Federation does. We have a program called Academics Afield that's specifically for college-age students. We're working with NC State University to do kind of a hunting and mentoring program there, so that's a year-long program. We do Getting Started Outdoors. We partner with the Wildlife Resources Commission on this and have a couple of our chapters who actually do these events, and they're workshops and mentored hunting events. So just another opportunity to get people outside. We also have Camo Coalition, which is outdoor advocacy. And so that is basically, you can sign up for it, a newsletter kind of situation where we do policy and you get a lot of information about kind of sporting events for men and women. So if you want to go to ncwf.org, you can sign up for Camo Coalition. Artemis is a program that the Wildlife Federation supports, which is all about sportswomen and conservation. So you can also see that on our website. And we are working here with the New Hill Hunter Education and Mentoring Program, Learn to Deer Hunt webinar series, which you guys are here to be a part of. And then we also, the Wildlife Federation has volunteers that put on the Deer Hunting 101 and From Field to Freezer annual seminars about deer hunting. And then we also work with North Carolina Hunters for the Hungry on deer processing and management. So we will go to the next slide. And the seminar series tonight was curated by the New Hill Education and Mentoring Program and its facilitating partners, which are listed here on the slide. The webinars are for adults new to deer hunting and include practical topics to explore the ins and outs of hunting to enhance your overall outdoor experience. So if you want further information on field opportunities, please see the New Hill Education and Mentoring Program Facebook page. And so tonight, I'm happy to introduce Evan and Andy. Those will be our speakers tonight. They are co-founders of Opportunity Outdoors. So I'll give you a little bit of background on each one, and then I'll let them introduce themselves and the webinar topic for this evening. Since he was just learning to walk, Evan was exposed to the great outdoors. Hailing from rural upstate New York, his family has always taken advantage of the opportunity to harvest game from the land. That upbringing left Evan wanting to share the wonders of wildlands with more curious people. From indoctrinating first-time deer hunters to teaching himself to archery hunt for bull elk in the Rocky Mountains, Evan lives to push boundaries in the outdoors. And then on to our joint speaker, Andy. Andy grew up in Michigan, learning to hunt and fish with his family. His relationship to the outdoors is rooted in the connection with putting food on the table. Having a wide range of experiences outdoors, if it lives in the woods or the water, Andy has probably tried to bring some home for dinner. His current obsession is archery hunting and experimenting with wild game cooking for his family. So we're very happy to have our speakers tonight, and I will turn it over to Evan and Andy.
Thank you, Liz. I really appreciate the introduction. I want to give a big thanks to the North Carolina Wildlife Federation for everything you guys do. You guys do an awesome job of helping conservation and much more beyond that. I don't think some people realize how much you guys really do. So huge shout out to you guys, and thank you so much for having us. Yeah, my name is Evan Trebilcock, and me and Andy, who is on the call as well. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Andy, if you'd like.
Hey, everybody. I would just echo what Evan says. Shout out to the North Carolina Wildlife Federation folks for hosting this and really expanding the reach. It's been great working with them. And yeah, keep going, Evan. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we founded Opportunity Outdoors. And Opportunity Outdoors, as I move forward here, is an organization that was created to grow conservation in the outdoor community through mentorship. And what we wanted to do was that we discovered a few things about the outdoors and the community within it, and that is pretty, it's very much centralized in the fact that if you're in it, you're in it, and if you're not, it's kind of a little bit of a barrier to get into it. There's a lot of really great R3 organizations out there, and we'll talk about some of that stuff, but it seemed to be a frontal thing. So what we look to do is create a community. And what we meant by that was not just hunters and anglers, but a community of outdoor enthusiasts. So that could be somebody who's hunt curious, or what we would call an emergent hunter, somebody who's interested in getting into it. But outdoor enthusiasts is where we wanted to start, and that would be new or old. People who wanted to just support each other in any hobby or an endeavor going into the outdoors. And then we wanted to make it so that we would all be educators. Whether you're new or old, you have something to bring to the table to any stranger in the parking lot, and as a hunter ed instructor, what have you. Anybody could be an educator, and anybody can learn from somebody else. And accessible. It's inclusive environment where the outdoors is for everyone, and anyone has the right. We live in a great country where we have chosen to have hunting and fishing and wildlife and conservation, where we all take a strong part in conserving that. So why did we do this? Well, me and Andy, we connected through Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and the Wildlife Resource Commission and North Carolina Wildlife Federation at a Getting Started Outdoors event for NC State. During this time, we realized how much we were alike, and we really enjoyed sharing this with new people who never grew up hunting and fishing like us, and it's infectious to see somebody new get into it. But we realized that after these programs, like the Getting Started Outdoor event, there was no contingency plan for these new hunters. There was no continued hunting mentors for somebody to go out there. It was kind of like, wow, that was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Now what? And Andy and I took it upon ourselves to say, well, come out with us some more this year. Just go hunting with us. And then we also realized that it is a bit of a burden when some current hunters look at it and say, you know, I would like to mentor somebody, but I don't have the time, or I'd like to bring somebody into the fold with me, but it seems like a lot. So what we're trying to do is make it so it's easier to be a coach in the outdoors when it comes to hunting and fishing or anything outside, and make it not so burdensome, and kind of reward those who do take that selfless act by giving them some kind of notoriety, although it shouldn't take that, but at the same time making sure that their efforts are known as rewarding and something that we appreciate very much. And we're also kind of redefining what it maybe means to be a mentor. It doesn't mean that you have to sit next to somebody every single time in a tree stand and tell them to go and take this shot or not. It's kind of more of a support is what we've done. And, you don't have to mentor one person all year, or you can mentor multiple people just for a day, or just answer text, or and we'll get into the how, and that is what I'm talking about right now. And what we do is, by providing support on how to be more efficient and an effective coach, we're helping those people, be better at it, and also give them access to the folks who need that help. We're highlighting the efforts we're creating more opportunities for mentors and mentees to meet at community events that are more compatible. And the way we're doing that is making sure that they're accessible to these people. You don't know what you don't know. And there's a lot of really great R3 organizations out there that people don't know about that are doing some really great work. But it's hard if you don't know what the National Wild Turkey Federation is because you've never turkey hunted. You may not know that they have a hunting heritage program that has filled with great people who want to take you turkey hunting. But we want to make sure people understand where that is and they can find it. Encouraging a pay it forward kind of approach to those who have previously been mentored. I think it resonates well with the New Hill mentors. Some of them were mentored themselves, and now they've taken it upon themselves to pass it along to somebody else, and they have a great apprenticeship thing going on right now with New Hill, and it's been extremely successful, as you can see through these programs. And if you are somebody who's willing to mentor someone else new, feel free to join us. It's extremely rewarding, and we've met some amazing friends doing this. So how do you get involved? These are our opportunityoutdoors.com is our website. You can reach out to us, connect at Opportunity Outdoors, or follow us on social media at Opportunity Outdoors. All of these folks here went through the New Hill mentoring program or are now a part of it, and we were graced with their success, and we hope that you guys as well can join us this season, whether you're a mentor or a mentee. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy now. And he is going to start us off.
Well done, sir. All right, so tonight we are really going to focus on EScouting. We're going to start by defining what that means. When we talk about EScouting, we're looking at where to hunt. Just like scouting on the ground is understanding where you're going to be hunting, specifically with all the awesome technology that exists today. So there are a million different ways to go about picking where you're going to hunt, from just knowing somebody with a piece of property to finding some public land somewhere. But there are a whole series of events that people have really kind of built their own strategies for how to do that. And we're going to kind of dive into all of that tonight. Through the agenda, we're going to talk about this puzzle of determining where you're going to hunt. It's kind of a never-ending puzzle. We're going to talk a little bit about maps, topography, how to read maps. I think that's a really important piece that hopefully people have some experience with, but if not, we'll at least give you kind of like a base layer, and then you can build on that. We're going to define some hunting tools, some GPS-specific hunting tools. We're going to look at where to get started, and then Evan and I are going to go ahead and give you guys a presentation, like a demonstration of how we would go about finding a place to hunt, what we'd be looking for, and why we would go to a certain place, and then what we would do once we're there. So finding that sign, being really effective. I think a big piece of it is that all of us are time sensitive. Time is extremely valuable in 2021. So being able to maximize your time is hugely important. So looking at the puzzle you'll never finish. We're going to assemble all these pieces, and this happens over time. So you're not going to dump the puzzle pieces out of this box all at once. This is it's as much of a puzzle as it is a scavenger hunt. So you might be able to pull a few pieces out of the box initially, but you're going to have to do some work to find the rest. We're going to address like the property itself. So when we're talking about a property, what defines the property? It has a border. Maybe you can, maybe you cannot leave that border. There's going to be access points. There's probably more than one if you're hunting a sizable property. We're going to talk about pressure on the animals that you're after. Specifically focused on whitetail deer. We're going to give some tips for food and bedding and travel routes and a lot of those pieces that you'll pick up on the ground, but we're going to talk about how that ties into the eScout. We're going to look at like what an animal's travel routes could look like, why they look that way, and then boots on the ground and looking at what you should be looking for once you have the map, kind of once you have the vision. There's always going to be some unknowns, and then I think our best advice is getting experience. To get experience, you have to go get it. It's really all there is to it. We feel like our job is to help people feel comfortable and confident so they can go get that experience. So a quick kind of history 101 on how to read maps. I don't know if any of you guys have seen a US topo map before, a USGS topo before, but that's a picture of one, and you would read that with a base plate compass, which is that picture of that compass there. These were kind of invented in the 1950s. Mapping the United States started around like 1840, really, kind of in like a professional kind of way. But it was really in the 1950s through the 1960s where we built the USGS book of topo maps. They're called 7.5 minute quad maps, or 24K. They're 24K scale, so the size is 24,000 to 1. They are there's 55,000 of those maps, and that covers essentially the continental U.S. They are free to access because they were put together by the government, and now all of our mapping tools are based on these maps that were drawn up by hand, mind you, back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Today, a lot of people that I bump into, I don't even think they know what those maps look like and how to read them, because we all use GIS. The geographic information systems of today are just amazing tools. You basically have all 55,000 of those maps plus hundreds more pieces and layers all built into one instantaneous system that can feed you exactly what you want at a given moment. It's really come a long ways, but I think there's a lot to be said about being able to understand how to read these maps in the first place, because it comes back to looking at the digital version. A real important one, when you first look at a topographic map, you see all those lines, the contour lines. Contour lines can vary. They'll be anywhere from a 10 to maybe an 80, sometimes even like 100-foot distance in between each line. So as you're looking at the lines on the map, you can see the elevation of the geographic landmark underneath it. So when you see that, those sets of circles, those sets of rings that are concentric like that, they are describing a mountain, right? It's a geographic feature. And being able to look at that map with all those lines and very quickly understand what that contour of that terrain is insanely valuable, not just to getting through that property, but also to understanding what the deer are doing. Here's a sample of what a map might look like and kind of some things you would look for. Starting on the top left, you've got what is a peak, followed by a ridge line with that dashed line following down. You can see where the red lines are stacked really close together. The closer those lines are together, the steeper that feature is. So right there where that little circle that says cliff, that's a very steep section. So if you were up on top of that, it would look, that looks to me pretty close to vertical. You wouldn't want to hike up or down that. You see the peaks or the concentric stacked circles. You can pick out valleys in between peaks and saddles. And then these maps typically contain like some green and white coloring side by side that you can tell, like green is typically treed or timbered and white is usually open. Everything that's developed will be white, and everything that's still forested will be green. And then lakes and rivers will all be marked in there in blue. So that said, kind of like a very quick 101 on how to read maps. Now we're going to talk about how you read those maps within a hunting specific GPS tool. So we've got probably the big one is OnX, HuntStand, and Base Maps. Those are probably the big three. Those are hunting specific tools. They are an app on your phone or a map download that you can download to your full-time GPS if you utilize a GPS. You can do amazing things with these tools. Avenza is also up there. That's a free tool that's pretty popular. I think Avenza for the hunter is more valuable if you do a lot of other things. I have a friend who's a GIS professional. He loves Avenza because he can build his own maps for it. But for those of us that kind of know what we want for hunting, I think the hunting built maps actually do a really good job. I think a lot of folks think you have to buy it. You don't have to buy the app. You don't have to pay the subscription. The free product itself will show you all the locations of a lot of things, and it'll allow you to do probably the most important thing, which is drop a pin in a specific location and then drop a route and track to it. So you can do a lot of the EScouting on a free product, and it's very powerful. The paid version of all of these apps basically give you the same thing. They give you private property boundaries. So if you are hunting small patches of public land and you want to make sure that you don't end up trespassing onto a landowner's property, that's an insanely valuable piece of knowledge. You can literally pull out your phone, and without having to be able to read a map or do anything, you can just look at where you are and know if you're in the clear or if you've accidentally meandered onto some private property and you need to skedaddle back to the south and get out of there. So getting started, figuring out where you're going to go. I like to start with Google Maps. I think Evan, I think you probably agree with me. It's a really fast mapping system. As you guys all know, we all use it daily these days. But when you use it on your desktop, you can very quickly go to Google and turn it on satellite mode and look at anything. You can look at any piece of property. You can see they have a terrain feature that is kind of like a topo map. It's pretty easy to see, but it doesn't have the finite features like a real topo map does. But then you can go to that satellite view and you can see like there's an open field and there's some thicker vegetation and there's a road that cuts through here, or maybe there's an old road that cuts through there that you can identify that way. And then if you don't want to pay for the paid app subscriptions, you can access all of the private land GIS data available pretty much throughout the entire contiguous United States by accessing, it's usually county by county GIS information. And we're going to give you guys a demo of how to do that. So it'll be a little easier to understand, I think, once we show you, in case you don't know what I'm talking about. Wildlife agency maps for public land, there are all kinds of cool maps, like paper maps that have been printed out there. And now they've all been digitized, so you can pull them up on your phone. So the Wildlife Resource Commission here in North Carolina does an amazing job, I think, of putting together a GIS system. I think that's the next slide here. We're going to talk about the pause system. Oh, I lied.
No, it's not, Andy, but that's all right.
That's okay. When we're looking at aerial imagery, something to look at is here's your topographic lines. So you can kind of see how Black Mountain comes up to that peak, and then Evan, if you click through the next two and just drop them on there, you've got a hybrid view, and then you'll also have a pure satellite view where you've got the lines with the satellite and then just the satellite on its own. These are cut from OnX Maps. So this is what your OnX mapping software provides in terms of a view. You can get a lot of information from looking at these. On this one, you can see the public land boundary. The green shadow is public land. The unshadowed section, white in the first shot, is the private. So you can know where the boundaries are, and you can get a good idea for the topography. Something you'll look for is you can kind of see in that center picture right underneath the words Black Mountain, the satellite imagery is a little bit lighter than in the rest of the shot. And you can, when you zoom in from this high view, you can really see the different trees, the different stands of trees based on the coloration in the satellite imagery.
Yeah, so we're going to get into demonstration here, but before we jump over to that, I'll just, reiterate what Andy said. I usually start with Google Maps. Another cool thing that we didn't add in there, and we should have, was the fact that they probably have the superior 3D mode. and you can actually see like what the topography looks like in the 3D mode if you really want to. The Onyx and some of the other apps are starting to get there, but I don't think they're as slick as Google Maps is yet. So with that said, let me jump onto the internet here. And alrighty, so where would I start? So we have the Google Maps is a great place to start, but I think what we're going to start with is the North Carolina Game Land Maps. And what I'm doing here and what I'm going to go through is exactly the process that I go through. So we'll go into North Carolina Pause Game Land Maps. And this is the maps that Andy said are like an awesome resource based off of what the agency gives you, and all of those little dots in there are game lands here in North Carolina. They're your lands, they're public lands. Me and Andy are backcountry hunter and angler members, and if you're interested in hunting in public lands, like all of this we have here in North Carolina, it's important to protect them. So, and that's the organization that does that. Make sure they're around for all of us.
North Carolina is pretty special. We have 2 million acres of public lands in this state, which is a lot for the East Coast. For the entire United States, there's 640 million acres of public land available to us. It's all ours as taxpayers. We own it. And this is, like I said, this tool by North Carolina Wildlife Commission, this is a really, really functional piece of GIS software where you can go and see all the places to hunt.
Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pretend like maybe I'm somebody from Charlotte or Greensboro or even Raleigh. And I'm just looking, you know, maybe for somewhere, if I don't live out in the mountains where there's an abundance of public land around. I mean, it's covering up Asheville and even some of the Boone area and even more west. And then the coast has a good amount of it too. But let's say you kind of live in this middle section and you're looking for somewhere to hunt. I'm just going to follow the green. It's basically where I'm going. And the Uwharrie National Forest, this is massive. So I'm interested in hunting Uwharrie, we'll say. You know, I'm going to take a trip out here. I'm going to do a camping trip maybe, or I'm just going to go out for a scout or a hunt. And when you click on the green, it tells you what game land this is. So the Uwharrie game land. And it maps it out for you. It tells you how many acres this little section is here. You click on another section, it tells you how many acres it is there. It tells you the county, so you can check regulations. Up here's a different county. Down here's a different county. So sometimes things change per county. Like in Wake County, you have to be 8 feet in a tree stand. But it'll tell you in the top right here some specific rules and regulations, and it even gives you a detailed map. On top of that, it gives you some of the species that are in there that are you can pursue. It tells you how many days a week this place is, and it even tells you the days of the week that it is. So the Wildlife Resource Commission has done an amazing job of giving you everything about the majority of the things that you need to know about these game lands right here at your fingertips by just searching North Carolina game lands. If you want to click specific rules and regs, it's going to take you to the rules and regs, which you can go through each game land and it tells you what goes on there. Like the Bladden Lakes here, it's only 3 days a week. And it tells you the difference between either sex, which is doe or buck hunting, when it starts and when it doesn't. And then it tells you a bunch of other regulations specific to each game lands. But if
That's an important one we can hit on real quick while we're here is understanding the day per week. There are several different orientations of that in North Carolina. Basically, you've got a 6 day per week where you can hunt every day except Sunday. You got a 3 day per week, which is usually Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And then you've got permit only, which is regulated by, you have to submit an application with a permit in order to hunt that game land. So it's really important if you're going to go hunt these public lands to just take the time to do that research so you know what you're getting into, when you're allowed to be there. Well, you can be there anytime, when you're allowed to hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what that link should take you to is some specific rules. So if you find a game land that's close to you or one that you maybe are traveling to see family, or you just decided you wanted to go on a camping trip and, you know, it's in hunting season, I think it'd be, you know, fun to even chase some small game or something in the fall or who knows. But what you can see out of this is the specific rules and regs, and you can check it really quickly, which is just super handy. It's right there. And then you got your detailed maps, which you click on this and it pops up your detailed maps. And you can get a little bit of different information out of this. And what you can see is some road maps. You can print these out. Maybe you're somebody who likes paper maps to print out just in case. For some reason, you just want to, you want it so that way you can like map out things. And it also will know out where impoundments are on there, just like all these other places are. And it most of the time will give you a legend here at the bottom. And this is something that some people don't understand maybe about game lands, is that there's archery only zones, there's a waterfowl impoundment, and these all have different regulations as well within them. Archery only is archery only. That's crossbows and bows. Game lands are wide open for the regular game land rules, and then there's waterfowl impoundments. Some of those you have to draw if you want to duck hunt, and you have to shoot steel shot in there. So just understanding, all the tools that are there and use them all. Just trying to show you where they're at. So we got these game land maps, and I'm just going to pick a place up here. It's a little closer to me. I'm going to go to the Burkhead Mountains Wilderness. I think this looks like a pretty big tract of land, and I'm going to scout this. So what would I do first? So to be honest with you, as a deer scout, this doesn't provide me too much besides a little bit of topography, like terrain looking stuff. I can pick out stuff. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the base map. And what I just did there, and what I'm about to do, is I can change what I want the base layer to look like. Now I've got imagery. So now I can kind of see a little bit of foliage within here. I can see what it looks like. And this is, I believe, connected through Google Maps or some version of that kind of satellite imagery. And you can kind of poke through and, go through some stuff. You can look at topography on here, like Andy was talking about, the different topos, to understanding what the terrain really looks like. And then you can just file through these, whatever you feel most comfortable with. It's pretty cool that they have all these different base layers to throw in there. But this is about as far as I go for the most part when it comes to a game land map. From here, typically what I'll do is I'll jump right into, maybe I'll even go to Google Maps, and I'll go right to Google Maps maybe next. And so I'm out here, I went back to Uhari, and I remembered where I was up in this zone. And I can say, okay, what's it going to take for me to drive out to this section? Well, there's the Burkhead Mountain Wilderness. Sometimes you click on here, obviously it gives you a picture of some stuff. And let's say I just wanted to drive from there. And let's just say I'm driving from my work. Well, it tells me how far I got to drive. So now I can already start my hunt plan and say, I think I really want to hunt here. It takes about an hour and a half. Okay, that's cool with me. And I'll exit out of that. I'm going to go to satellite. And then there's the Burkhead Mountains. And now this is when I'll switch to 3D a little bit. So you can kind of see that it's got some nice rolling hills in here. So there's some things that pique my interest when it comes to different terrain. Now, you could continue to scout through like this. I've done a lot of scouting like this, and what I would do possibly is look through these river bottoms, see what kind of foliage you have. You can change the base layers a little bit to what year you're seeing in satellite imagery. For the most part out here in the east, stuff is pretty dense, so I don't focus too much on this kind of stuff. When I'm scouting out west to go to Colorado, I really want to see what the terrain looks like. I want to take a look at north versus south facing slopes because I'm hunting elk and they tend to be on one side of the mountain versus another during different times of the year. So I use this tool more for some other stuff, but I just wanted to show you the capabilities of it. But I use OnX Maps. and I use the OnX Hunt Map. I actually won an elite membership through Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Last time I was in here, I was looking at Colorado just recently. But as you can see, I use this extensively. I think the paid version is worth it, whether you're using Huntstand or Onyx or whatever you like. The great thing is you can do a 7-day free trial if you've never used it before. So I suggest trying it out first. But hopefully going over this will help you understand how to use these tools so you can get the most out of it, your free 7-day trial. So we were previously at the Uwharrie National Forest, which is right over in here, same place on the map. And we are over here by this wilderness zone. So now I'm actually starting to really get interested in scouting. And I'm going to show you how to use some of these tools and how to use this tool specifically. I usually keep it in hybrid mode so I can see topography and I can see satellite. That's just how I typically like to use it. This is where I had originally marked where I would enter in. And as you can see, we have a road in here, or a creek, or some kind of access points. And as Andy was saying, the green is what is public. So everything green on here is public land to me. I have every right to be on it. I can go on here any time of the year. And you can hunt through every season as long as the regulations allow you to. So here's another closer access point. And this is where I'm going to start making access points. So I'm going to add a waypoint. And I'm going to go through more. So right up there at the top, you have your line distance, your area shade, add your waypoint, and you can even add a photo. So I went to add a waypoint, and I'm going to go to access. And usually I change the colors per what I'm doing. So I like yellow for access. I don't know if it's just yellow road or what it is. It just sticks out to me. So I'm just going to say access point here. So maybe this is where I'm going to park when I go to hunt. Or this is an access point for me. And maybe I'm going to go and identify all the access points that are within this zone. So there's another access point over here. There's some more access points through here. And I would mark them all, but just for the sake of time, I am going to just show you what I would do. So I'm going to save that. And you can name them. You can say what they are and some descriptions. My internet's running a little slow right now, so it's trying to catch up. I'm sure that might be a little frustrating if things are moving on you because I'm having a tough time with that. But from there, what I might do is say, okay, if I'm accessing this game land from here, where would other people access this? Well, they'll probably access it from the same spot I am. And I'm not thinking about necessarily just the day of that I'm hunting there. I'm also thinking of previous days. If that's the main access point, then to be honest with you, you can almost take an area, I'm going to use a shape area, and say, you know, this section from here, and this is the area tool. I'm going to say, to be honest with you, this right here, I probably would avoid that area for the most part, just because when it comes to deer hunting, they don't love high traffic. It's not saying that there's not deer there, and it's not saying you couldn't get a deer there. But me personally, I like to get away from crowds a little bit. But what you have here is all of this game land to explore through this Betsy McGee's Creek, and you can also change the topography so you can see the creeks a little better. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll even switch to this. I'll add a waypoint and I'll say I have water in here. So I know that there's water. And you can drag these wherever you'd like them. So if you want to drag them, you can do that. So there is the water spot. Let's see if it'll save for me here. Oh, another thing that I didn't point out is when you do click on these zones, it tells you also that it's North Carolina Game Lands. It tells you the name of it, Uwharrie. It tells you some elevation. It tells you who owns it. the acres that you're clicked on. And then you can do a bunch of other stuff. You can share this with something else. And that's another reason why me and Andy really trade on and off with OnX, is that I can share this with Andy. I could click this and send him an email or a text off my phone, and Andy can get these waypoints. So it's super helpful. Another thing we can do is you go to map layers, and because I have the elite version, which is all states, I have a couple states. I hunt in New York, I hunt in North Carolina, and through these map layers, you can change what you want to see. So I have the North Carolina government lands on, I have the North Carolina game land maps on. I could put the GMUs on it. It's not as applicable in North Carolina because I believe it goes by county, and then it goes by whether you're in the eastern, central, and Piedmont or mountain zone. So you could put it on there. That's more for an out west kind of thing when you have tags for specific.
It is nice. It shows you. It tells you what your seasons are, what deer region you're in.
Yeah. So that's what we could do with that. But you could put the private lands on, which when you put the private lands on, as you can see, some things are starting to get red in here out in the outside. And once you have those on, it seems like my internet's getting really slow. It tells you
it's probably because you're running OnX and trying to share. That's a lot of computing.
But it tells me the owner of this property. It also tells me their tax address, and it also tells me how many acres they have. So in theory, I could send a letter to this person and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Lucas, I'd like, permission to hunt your property, et cetera, and we can talk more about that maybe in the Q&A about how maybe we approach people with private property and how we get access. But what I want to do now is actually talk about how I would scout this piece of property. So deer, if I'm scouting this for deer versus turkey, it's not too much different. Turkey's a little more interactive, so I'm looking for high ridges to call to, and I know turkey's coming around, so I just wanted to throw that out there for anybody who's interested in using this turkey scout with. As you can see, the topography, you got your steep ridges that go down to some creek bottoms like this creek here, and you got some top peaks. If I was turkey hunting, I would probably go right up through here, get up on this top ridge line, and just cruise it and call or listen for turkeys gobbling. And once I heard one, I'd go in after them and start calling. I mean, that's basically the essence of turkey hunting for the most part. But if I'm deer hunting is a much more ambush kind of game, unless you got a bunch of guys and you're doing some pushes. So what am I looking for deer season? Deer season, it all depends on the time of the year for the most part, but you got to remember that there's some very similarities in behavior when it's deer, no matter where you are in the state or even in the country. One big thing that I always look for, number one and always, is bedding. Bedding. What do I look for when it comes to bedding? And how do I find it on a map? Well, the first thing I look for is thicker patches, low bottoms, or steep ridges, places that just seem like a pain to get into or are far away from other people, but most of the time I switch to satellite, and what I'm looking for is some thick stuff. Now, sometimes their bedding is in different areas outside of the game lands themselves, so you kind of got to think about outside the box a little bit. Now, all of this looks pretty wooded for the most part. It's a lot of tops, but
this is what I was talking about a little earlier. You can really see it pretty well in this view, especially when Evan zooms in another click. You can identify, right now we're in winter, so the maps will rotate through the year. Right now, OnX has the wintertime North Carolina map up, so you can see all the hardwood trees. Anything deciduous dropped its leaves, and now it's that gray color. You can see through it to the forest floor, even in a lot of cases. The conifers, all the pine trees, are really easy to identify. They're bright green, they're in tall stands and patches, so it's really easy for you to look at this view and say, there's a patch of pine trees, there's a ridge of pine trees bumping right up to a stand of some kind of hardwood. When you're able to zoom in even closer, you can, if you've been into some of these areas, it kind of changes by region of the country, but you can kind of start to identify like what kind of tree is likely there. So since Evan and I were just in Uharri last weekend, we both learned that, man, if you're up on a relatively dry ridge that is mostly deciduous, right? So it's mostly a tree that's going to drop its leaves. There's probably a fair bit of old growth oak, and that means there's probably some acorns. So we know that that creek is a nice wide low bottom, and we know that up on those slopes, up on those ridges, is going to stay a little bit dry. Those tan ridges with the gray tan edging are probably sparsely packed full of oaks. So we know that those might be places we're going to want to maybe drop some pins to go walk through to start identifying food sources. And hopefully while we're at it, we'll walk through some of that thick stuff that Evan was mentioning so that we can find some bedding. You can see from that topo view, actually, I really like that topo view. You can see down low, kind of around that blue dot that Evan marked for water, you can see how all the contour lines are really wide, spaced really far apart. And I'm not just talking about the dark indicators. I'm talking about each line, even the fine ones. That tells me that that's a pretty flat area. It's going to be pretty, it's not real steep. It's going to be a nice, easy, low valley, which means that whole zone could hold some pretty good amounts of water, which means you're going to get high rates of vegetation once summertime rolls around. And then up on those steep edges, that's where you're going to look for those oaks up on the pines, up on the ridges.
Right. Yeah. So we got Coolers Knob, Mountain Creek over here. This area, I would probably guess that Andy was just mentioning. So I'm going to take a guess that in these creek bottoms, and now again, EScouting is a guess. Like, it's your best educated guess based off of what Andy just said. Your low wet bottoms are going to grow the most vegetation, especially a nice low flat area like this that's not being too overshadowed by any other mountains or hills in the area. So I would possibly, and where you click on this map as well, you can add a waypoint right here. So I'm going to say potential bedding area, and I'm going to change it to brown because, I don't know, deer. And I'll save that. And it might not stay there for a minute here, but hopefully it pops back up. Sometimes things, oh, I have also another thing that I forgot about. You have filters within these maps, so you can change them from new to old, A to Z. I have filters going on right now. Because it's turkey season, I turned it off, bedding areas, but I can turn them back on. I can turn the deer sign back on, ground blinds back on. So I can just clear all filters and go back. So that is another thing you can do, and that's in my content. So that's all the stuff that I put out there.
That's that stuff that's really helpful when you're like Evan and you have 5 million different waypoints on your map, and you got to be able to sort through them and see stuff.
Yeah, and it'll bog you down too. If you have way too much stuff in there and you're trying to look through something, it'll bog you down if you just have all kinds of pins in there. Like, I'm pretty good at remembering why I put a pin there, but for the most part, I mean, you can get to a point where it's just too much. So right here, I'm going to say potential bedding area. Now I'm going to go scout that. And what I'll probably do is I'll come to this parking spot, I'll come through and I'll scout this whole creek bottom. Odds are I'm going to scout this whole creek bottom all the way down into here, because the reason why I'm going to do that is I'm going to try and find every single bedding area I can, especially right now when I'm seeing where the thicker areas are before everything looks thick and the green vegetation. So I'll add another waypoint in here for bedding. And then even sometimes what I'll do, I'll just make myself a line distance trail. And usually I denote trails by just little dots. And I'll say I'm going to go down here, hit this. And every time you click, it adds a little spot. And I am going to walk this whole creek bottom next time I go. And I'm going to save it. So that's my first travel route. I'm going to go through here. I'm going to check out this entire creek bottom, especially now before all the buds come through. And I'm going to start going through here. And I might delete some of these pins that I had before, but I'm going to make new pins where maybe I found deer sign, I find deer trails. Another reason why I always walk creek bottoms is you will find the wettest areas, which gives you the freshest deer sign, because you can tell where the freshest tracks are. And once you find the freshest tracks, you can determine where those deer are going. Now, what you also have to keep in mind is when you find fresh tracks in January or February or March, that might not be the same travel paths that they're going to be taking in October and November. So just because you found a track then doesn't mean that they'll be using that travel route, but it's really good to note that the deer are there and they're using the area. Maybe they'll use the same bedding area, but they might not use that same trail until a certain time of the year. So I just want to keep that out there as a disclaimer that just because you found an area that has some sign doesn't mean they're going to be there all year using that trail. But at the same time, if you find a trail that has a bunch of old rubs on it and some scrapes on it, that's a good sign for somewhere during pre-rut, right before they really kick off and are chasing does. So just be mindful of what you're seeing and why you're seeing it. And that's why I always say find your whys and know what they are and try and put that puzzle piece together. So from there, what I might do is I'm going to go and do a line distance through this area. And I'm not going to try and take the path of, the most resistance. I'm going to go least resistance, and using the topo, I might go up through here, and then I'll work my way up towards this ridge.
So that line that Evan's drawing right now is, he just mentioned the path of least resistance, which was the next thing I was going to hope to bring up. The deer are lazier than you are. They don't want to go up the steep hills. They don't want to go through the thick brush. They're going to only go up steep hills when they're running away from you, and they're only going to go into steep brush when they're trying to hide. By using those topo lines, you guys can see how quickly Evan drew that map. That's because he's got a ton of experience staring at these topo maps and then also walking them in real life. So he kind of knows what it feels like to be on those different gradients. But he very quickly identified what's going to be an easy route. And what you'll find is that when you go follow an easy route through the woods, the deer are going to do the same thing. The game trails are going to be similar to that because they want to go up through those easy rise saddles, and you'll find corridors that way. You can see that one peak, Evan, if you could just put your mouse on that peak right at the base there. From there, just a hair north of there, you drop down into a saddle, and then on my screen, I don't know, it's probably like a total of 2 inches to the next peak. So right yep, there's the next peak. In between those two peaks, that slightly low spot, we would call that a saddle. I would bet lots of money that there's a deer trail that goes right through there, horizontally, left to right. Those are the kind of things that you might mark as well, or at least make mental note of. And then when you're out there, you're going to double check. And if it's there, you'll definitely drop a pin.
You can add some notes in there if you wanted to, like throw a question mark in there. And Andy's right. What deer are going to do is they're going to take, so I grew up in New York, which is very hilly, kind of like this, like Uhari is. It reminds me, I love hunting Caswell and I love hunting Uhari because it's this little bit of a smaller version where I grew up, which is kind of like, it's very hilly. And what the deer will do is they'll run creek bottoms and they'll run ridge tops, but they won't run right on the very top necessarily. They'll run right on the edge. And the reason why they'll do that is because they can jump right down the hill as fast as they can. If they see you, it's just straight down. Or if you came up from the bottom, they can jump right over to the other side and they're gone. So what I'll do is I'll find these ridge lines and I'll try and find the trails that go up through them. Bucks will cruise those during the rut looking for does because they can smell using the thermals, and a lot of times the does are also taking those same travel routes. So Andy's right, and if you find different areas that have maybe some better, less resistance to travel, the deer naturally find these places. They adapt to the land like you do. I bet you on the other side of this creek, especially in these thick pines over here, that's probably a bedding area. That's somewhere that looks like it's thick, hard to get into even when the leaves drop. These areas look good, but this is really thick in here. Now, I think some of this is outside of the game lands in here, so it's important to know what's going on over there outside of the game lands because you might be able to catch some deer coming from off the game lands and onto them, especially the rut when they're running around. But what I'm showing here is this is how I look through a property, and then once I get my boots on the ground is when I really start to dig into what I'm seeing and adding pins and looking at this, and I send stuff to Andy and I send pictures and I take pictures and I throw them. You can add pictures inside of some of these waypoints. And now what I'll do is I'll zoom out and I will show you what my pins look like on this map. I mean, I live in the Raleigh area. I go through Caswell quite a bit. I go through the Falls Lake quite a bit. I go through Jordan, and I even have already EScouted all my turkey spots on the Croatan. I've got pins all over the place, but that's just because when I have the free time and I'm planning a hunt, this is the stuff I'm marking down, and then when I go out there, I mark them, and I keep track of them, and I remember, and I delete them, and I go back, and I adjust them, and I say, you know, this is what's really was going on. I just marked this area as a potential place to get into. Now from here, like Andy mentioned, I might mark this saddle as, oh, it might be a nice little acorn flat, so maybe I'll go in here and I'll add some food. I've learned the more that I use OnX and the more pins that I have to be more organized, because everything with a red X on it means nothing to me at some point. I always forget. So if oh yeah, I think there's some food there. Or, oh yeah, I think something else is here. And when I really
I name all my pins, and I put, I'll leave the date in there even, because sometimes I can reference the day. If I know a decent chunk of information, I'll add to the little description section, and I'll take a note. If I was out on the ground that day dropping pins, I'll say this was the sunny day with the whatever happened, or this was that really rainy day where you got slogged out. So.
Yeah, and you can go into these old pins and you can edit them. You can go in here and change the color. You can change the notes. You can add photos.
Yeah, it's always fun to drop a rub pin and take a picture of the rub and put it there so you can go find it next year. Yeah,
you can say oak trees up here for the pit. And then when you share this with somebody, it'll share all that information. And if I go into my content, I think I can go to like shared content as well. And I can, see I have some content in here that was shared by one guy. And then I have things that are shared by all kinds of people, friends. I have places with pictures on here. Like when I was in Colorado, I took a picture of where I saw a moose, so I can go back and remember that. Or wallows, or where we camped. And sometimes the pictures are super helpful to kind of remember a landmark if you have like a really tight spot to get into. And you're like, oh, there was this really, really, really good trail, but it was hard to find. How can I find it, you know, next time I'm in there when the foliage changes? You might be able to take a picture of a certain tree. And it's just, there's so many little tools within here, and you'll find your system. But EScouting is just a huge part of what I do, and I use OnX heavily. So we'll
I was going to say, for the sake of time, because I know we want to have some time for Q&A, and we've still got a couple slides that just kind of highlight the things that we would be looking for on the ground. Let's just skip that. Go to your OnX real quick.
Yeah.
Because that map's going to load super slow.
Yep.
And just grab any private data.
Yeah, so if I was looking for some property, maybe something like this, a farm with some fields or etc., somewhere easy to access.
You wanted access to an adjacent private lot. Here it is on OnX, where Evan pays for the premium, so it shows the private land owner name. It gives you their tax address. Their tax address is where their tax information gets mailed to. So that address may not be the same as the address for this property. That's important to notice. If they have a different address than the one for this property, then they don't live there. So they might be harder to get hold of. You also probably can't just roll up and ask for permission. But you do get a little bit of information there, and you can mail people letters. Now, what we were going to show you guys that we're going to skip is another way to get this information, and actually a little bit more, is to go to pretty much any county in the country. If you just Google the county name, GIS map, like he just did here, Randolph County GIS. These maps load really, really slowly, but you can't, and they're not as intuitive to use. But you can go through there and click on people's properties, and you can pull up that same information that we just showed you on OnX. So that's how I would go about finding the name and the address of an individual if I wanted to try and gain access to their property.
Yeah. And just for a little history, I never used to be a public land hunter, and that and Google Maps is all I used to use, and I used to gain permission on private property. And then I realized, what the heck is the Army Corps of Engineers owning all of Jordan Lake? And then I realized it was public land. So, so there's that. I was like, I wonder if I can hunt that. And then, yeah, it was public land. So, yeah, you can get by without it. So it is something that you can use. It's the free version.
If you were using the free version of OnX, this is where you would go to get the additional information if you wanted to go after some private. But
yep, and I would take the GIS map right parallel or right next to my OnX, and I would use the area thing to map this out, and then I would just save it as so-and-so's name.
Yeah, so that boundary line, what he's talking about right now, that boundary line that you see, if he wanted to, say, mark on the free version of OnX where the boundaries are, he would manually do that on his desktop with that line drawing tool that he showed you earlier to make the trail. He would manually draw that shape by having the two maps side by side, just like he's doing right now. And then when he clicks save and saves this shape, he'll be able to go on his phone while he's on the ground on this property, and the phone GPS will drop a pin where you're standing. And that way you can make sure that you stay within that area that you've identified as either the private land that you have access to, or the public land that you can't see because you don't have the paid version of OnX. So there are pretty quick, clever ways to use these tools without having to pay any money. So yeah, here's a
offline maps.
Yeah.
You know, sorry, I was just going to say offline maps. If you're somebody who goes out into the wilderness zones, or you might be somewhere where there's low service, or you're worried about it, you can save offline maps, which means basically when you have no cell service, your GPS still works. So you can map yourself through here, and you save it on the offline, and it downloads. And that's all I was really going to say. So.
All right. Let's go back to that slideshow, and I'm going to challenge you, Evan, in front of all these people. If you can get through the next, I think there's 10 slides on basically what we would be looking for once we are on the ground. And you're in presenter mode. I don't know if you can go to, there you go. I'm just going to go on mute and let you blaze through what we're looking for.
I had to skip through it because I ended the on an accident. Not a big deal. So this is what we all talked about, and I'll be able to breeze through some of this because demonstration. But now we're just talking about deer trails, what you're looking for when you're out there, how to find them. Like I just mentioned, search water for crossings. Look for the heavily used areas that they're crossing. They're going to look like a bike trail, especially the heaviest used ones. Those should be the ones you should get most excited about, because that means there's deer in the area, they're using that trail, and it's a start. I follow them. I grew up hunting, and the best way that I ever learned to follow deer trails and understand deer is to follow their trail. I would just literally stay on the trail and follow them. I got off the road, I got into the thicket, and I followed these deer trails, and it helped me understand where they're going, why they're going there. It also helped me understand trends and behaviors of deer, why they're following the bottom creek line maybe, or why they follow that top ridge, or why they cross at this certain crossing. And that's just how I learned to hunt them. And I did that through my father, that's how he set his new spots for bow hunting. He would follow deer trails. That's how he taught me. He's like, follow the deer trails. Once you find a deer trail that looks promising and something that you think, a couple trails intersect, think about putting a tree stand there. Think about where the wind's blowing. Think about the usual predominant wind and where it's blowing, and then think about the tree that you would want to sit in. So that's how I do it. Once you find a deer trail, just follow it. Follow it. It's actually usually easier to walk through a deer trail than it is anywhere else in the middle of the woods. So it's honestly convenient. Rut sign. When you're on these deer trails, look for them. And especially right now, right before the spring green up, you're not going to affect anything with the deer's behavior or spook them. I mean, even if you do, they'll come back by the time next year rolls around. So follow the tracks and look close to thick bedding areas. It tends that bucks tend to make most of their activity near bedding areas where they think does will be. And there's a difference between buck bedding and doe bedding areas. I want to make that clear, but any kind of bedding area, if you're just looking for a shot at any kind of deer, is something you want to key in on. Scrapes, look for scrapes. They're these big dirt patches that look like just got literally scraped off the ground, and usually they'll have a couple deer tracks or some paw marks in there, and they have a little tree branch that's leaning over right about your eye, chest level height, that'll have some broken twigs, which they call a licking branch, and the bucks will use that in their scent glands. Rubs, it literally looks like somebody took some kind of pickaxe to a tree or knife and just started hacking away at it, because that's literally what they do to it. And they use those glands on their heads to rub their scent on it, and they also use it to get the velvet off their racks. And a lot of these scrapes or rubs will come in a line, and it's usually called a scrape or a rub line. Not always, but sometimes you'll have a deer who just marks a trail, and that's his rub line, that's his scrape line, that's his daily pass, maybe past his doe bedding area. And they're good areas to mark while you're scouting out there, because deer will reuse those areas, especially if they're still alive. Natural food, how to find it. You're gonna have to understand your trees. You're gonna have to do a little bit of research. I'm terrible at this. It's not necessary to be a great deer hunter to understand every tree and plant that's out there. But you should know some, and you should know the important ones, like, if there's any crops or if there's any neighboring lands that have some different kind of food on it. Learn what plants are in your area, especially different parts of the state. You go all the way to the coast, it's different than what's all the way to the mountains and the higher elevations. Understand when the deer eat these types of food. In the spring and the summer, we're getting into the spring, we're going to go into the summer. They eat some softer mass, like berries that come into season, some different forbs, some tender woody browse. You'll see where deers have eaten those buds. And then in the fall and the winter, they're looking for their high priority carbs when they're rutting and they're running around and the weather's cold. They're looking for high protein, they're looking for acorns, they're looking for woody evergreen plants, stuff that's available to them, especially once it gets colder. Even fungus. And by fungus, I mean mushrooms. Knowing the difference between the acorns and how important that is. So a white oak has the rounded leaves and a red oak has the pointed leaves. There's a great video from Meat Eater from Clay Newcomb. He calls them acorns because he's from Arkansas, and he wants us all to call them acorns, so I'll refer to them as acorns. White acorns have the rounded leaves, and they have these big acorns, and every there's a bunch of different species of white and red oaks, but for the most part, this is the rule of thumb where you're out there is the pointed versus the rounded. White acorns are the high priority for all animals in the woods. That's the first thing that gets eaten. It's the first thing that germinates before the next spring. They actually start to germinate in the fall, so they go away before the other ones. And the red, they are biannual, where the white happens every single year. So the red happens every other year. So one year you might have a bunch of red acorns, the next year you're not going to have any, and vice versa for the following years. It's just going to keep it in that cycle. Red acorns are still very much important. They drop later and they get eaten last after the white. They're still a high priority food for the deer, so do not ignore them, especially later in the season once you start rolling into that gun zone. Fruits and berries, that soft mass earlier in the seasons, but I have seen that the persimmons, they drop a little later, right around bow season. They were coming around, and they'll eat those as well. Apples, obviously, depending on where you are, up in the mountains, I'm sure they'll have some out there. Raspberries, blackberries, pears, and keep in mind where these fruits and berries are in the season, because that's pretty important, because that's when the deer will key in on them. They'll drop, they'll eat them, they get out. So bedding. bedding is probably one of the most important things that you need to find when you're deer hunting. And why? Because they're usually there all day, and then during those low light hours is when they leave those areas. So basically bedding can be the hardest places to get to, is basically the bottom line. They know where people don't want to go, and that's where they feel the most safe. It's usually noisy, so they can hear you before you get in there. If you think a deer could lay down in a big patch of briars or tall grass and you would never be able to see it, odds are they've done it. So especially the smartest ones, they understand that you could walk right by them and you never see them. There's been times where people walk and just stand there, and this has happened to me, and then all of a sudden a deer pops up. It got nervous, it thought you'd walk right by them, and they popped up. And then look for patches of ground in these bedding areas that are like laid down, kind of in that one picture. Usually has to do with like briar patches, steep slopes. I grew up, like I said, talking about those steep slopes. You get a blow down tree with a really steep slope, a really smart buck will go sit there because he can see all the way down the hill, and then you're going to have a hard time seeing him. My buddy's father actually shot a deer out of its bed because he saw his tips of his antlers above a tree that was on a really steep slope, and he just happened to catch him. So my father instilled in me to look down those steep slopes just to double check. Swampy areas with some high spots. Some deer will go to the extremes of getting out of the way because they know you're not going to go through the swampy areas, and they find a nice dry spot and they'll sit up in there, kind of like that picture in the top right. Tall grass. We learned this year that deer really enjoy sitting in the tall standing corn because you can't get to them without them hearing you, and it's really thick and you can't see through it, and they feel super comfortable, and they even have food surrounding them, so they don't have to go anywhere. And then new succession areas with some thick saplings and undergrowth. Usually those tend to be like cuts. The North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission does a lot of maintenance on their properties, or sometimes Duke Energy does some cuts where they take away the pine. Once those grow up for a couple of years and it's really nasty to get into, deer love it. Deer will live in there most of the day. Scouting and gear tools. So now I know we mentioned in the last one, how would you go about traveling through some of these bedding areas? Well, if you want to make a trail that goes into a bedding area that you think maybe will be a really good spot during the rut while the bucks are chasing the does in those bedding areas, bring some clippers and bring some saws and bring some stuff that cuts you a path into that bedding area and makes it more accessible for you to use. My father has a cousin who might be one of the best hunters I know, and he carries a pair of these because he hunts in the creek bottoms with the briars, and he gets some really good deer every year and sees a lot of deer. And what he does is he takes those clippers and he clips his path through it, so that way he knows when he's going through it, come deer season, he doesn't have to do anything. And then you can bring that saw with you in case you happen to see a tree and you're already out there and you want to save some time. You can cut your limbs and your branches, before the season. So when you're ready to go bring a stand in there, sit up there, you can just, you have already done half of the work, if not more of it. And you did it when you weren't disturbing the deer right before the season, because they notice these things. You think maybe they aren't there when you do it, but they walk through 3 hours later when it's dark, and they get your smell, they get your scent, and then they avoid that area for a while. Some brush pants, like I said, talking about walking through some thick stuff, maybe a really old pair of jeans, but at the same time, it still hurts when you get stuck with some briars. So consider maybe some tougher pants. Flagging material, if you're walking through some thick areas or you're just not used to the area yet, place them where your trail starts or where you want to put something. Maybe somebody will see it, but maybe they won't think much of it. And then a bug spray or permethrin down here in the south, obviously when you're scouting in the spring and even into the summer, or you're out there, the ticks and the chiggers will bite you and it will not be fun. So I suggest using permethrin, which you have to be very careful with some of these things. They can be toxic if you don't use it properly. So please read everything, make sure you're being safe, so that way you can also keep yourself more safe and avoid health risks. Final thoughts, and that is one, to don't get frustrated or feel lost. And what I mean by that is I just take this as a learning experience, that every time you go out there, you're learning something new. don't feel like it's going to be instantaneous because it's not. I always feel like I used to get so frustrated because I should be figuring this out, but at the same time, you don't really figure them out. You just put yourself in higher odds. Create a hypothesis and ask yourself some questions, and ask experienced hunters and mentors. You can reach out to Andy or I at any time. We'll give you our honest opinion, but to be honest with you, you should kind of think about why you think that way. Ask the questions to yourself, and if you don't know the answers, or maybe you're looking for somebody else's perspective, ask another person that knows some more stuff. Use pictures and mark potential sign, and that goes back to GIS, the mapping tools. Mark where you're at, take some pictures so when you go back you can see it. Take notes and write in a journal so you can look back and remember. I have a journal. I use it mainly for hunting memories, but I'll also use it for some scouting stuff. Understand that the woods change with the season. So what you see now and in the spring is not what you're going to see in October. Same with the summer. You're not going to see that in November, and so on and so forth. So the deer change their behavior as the woods change. So just keep that in mind. Think forward about the present. They might be using this bedding area all year that you found, but they might not use the trail that goes into it until a certain time of the year because of different food, different behaviors, whether that be the rut. Just think about what you're seeing. See it for what it is, but at the same time, think about what it means for me during deer season. Cover ground and really learn the land. I think my favorite thing about scouting new land is I get to learn more about that land, and it's almost like when you're driving a car and you remember, oh, I take a left here and then I take it right here. I don't need my GPS. Get that familiar with the places you want to hunt, and you'll learn it so much better, and you'll know it like you'll never know it like the deer know it, but you'll know it to a point where you feel very comfortable. Go back to areas that you feel looked best and start thinking about hunting plans. So if you can find a lot of sign, a lot of rut sign, etc. in certain areas, go back to that on your map. Think about it. Look at it again on the aerial. Start thinking about how you'd hunt that area. Don't over-scout an area. When you over-scout an area that looks promising, the animals respond. They understand that somebody's been in here multiple times. They have your scent. They know what's going on. So they might leave and go off. So once you found an area you like and it's a good area, start thinking about limiting your access to there. And the more areas you scout, the more spots you have. So just because you found one spot that looks really good, don't forget that somebody else may have hunted it the last 3 years in a row and they just don't scout it anymore. And you know what? You might want some more spots. Finally, Opportunity Outdoors. Again, find your opportunity through us at opportunityoutdoors.com and connect to Opportunity Outdoors. There's a cell phone number for us as well. Basically, what we want to say is we're here for you throughout your hunting experience, from the day you get out of an R3 program, or you met somebody and then you moved away or they moved away. If you want to go hunting with us, we're welcome to it, whether you're a mentor, a mentee, or just somebody interested in tagging along on a hunt or talking to us. Feel free to reach out to us. And I'll turn it over to questions. Think you're muted.
Yeah. Do you guys use anything to boost your GPS signal on your phone when you go out?
No, I don't. I just use that the OnX saved maps, and then from there I'll run with that.
Okay.
You shouldn't have an issue with the GPS signal. It's just the data. So you'll drop the map, but you won't drop the like where you are.
Hey Liz, I think you were muted earlier. I saw you trying to talk, but it kind of.
I was, but you guys have it all covered. So I'll just go here to the next one. How about Andrew?
Hey guys, thanks for taking the time out to go through this class with us. Just about approaching landowners, or what to say in the letters that you guys have had luck with in the past as far as approaching them about their land or about using their land for hunting. Thank you.
I think the most valuable thing you can do is try and connect with them on their level, which what I mean is that folks that have land, especially land that we all would love to go hunt, usually there's some kind of work out there to be done. So if you can get them talking about their needs and offer a solution to something that they're dealing with, they're going to be a lot more likely to help you out. You're going to get a lot of no's if you just go walking around asking people to deer hunt on their land, because they've all heard that. They all probably have family and friends. So Evan's probably got something to add to that. He does this a lot more than I do.
Yeah, so I grew up a private land hunter. I was graced with a father who had plenty of property to hunt through friends. But when I moved away, I had to figure it out myself, and only being somebody who hunted private, I didn't think much about public. That was for people who wanted to get away from other people. You know, I mean, that was a place for a bunch of hooplas to run around down and, you know, shoot with their guns. But I love hunting public now, so there's no bad blood there. But what my approach has always been, and I have a very decent success rate, probably 50%, and that is usually I'll use the GIS or OnX, and I'll strategically look for places that, one, have a short driveway, so it's really easy to walk up to somebody instead of walking a long driveway. People don't like that, so don't do it. Two, if you wanted to, you could write a letter. There's some great resources on how to write a good permission letter. I think person-to-person interaction is way more valuable. A face to a name, showing how courteous you are, how well-mannered you are, how good of a person you are. I think that goes a long way. I usually start with, hi, so-and-so, because I've already done the research on who owns the property. So usually it's, hey, Mr. Johns, you know, is it okay if I talk to you real quick? Hey, yeah, sure. What do you need? Hey, I was just looking to see if you or, and this is a key sentence, you or anybody you know needs some help on some property, and all I'm asking for in exchange is to hunt about, you know, 4 or 5 weekends out of the year, because, you know, gun season's only this long, and I'm willing to help you any way you can throughout the entire year, you know, a few weekends out of the year if you got a project or if you know someone who does. Now, they may say no, but I've gotten yeses from Hayden saying, hey, I know this guy over here and he needs some help. You should go talk to him. And I've gotten a yes and access to 300 acres of property. And then I become really good friends with that farmer because I help them with what they need. And sometimes people will say, what can you do? And I usually respond, well, what do you need? And if I can do it, I'll help them. Sometimes you may know somebody who can help them. So, and if you get a no, but they're very nice to you and like, oh, you know, this year, probably not, you know, you can go back the next year and just, hey, you know, just seeing if you still need any help. You know, I know you said no last year, just checking again. Until someone
my favorite technique is one that Evan and I joke about, but it really does work. Bring them a little something, usually something tasty, like some homemade deer jerky, and say, here's got some homemade jerky for you. I wanted to talk to you about your property. And you'd be kind of amazed at how quick they'll change when you're bringing something to the table. And then, yeah, you know, if you let me shoot some does off your land. That's another one, is ask people, when you are talking to people, typically you're not going to have very much luck if you're looking to trophy hunt on their property for free anyway. But if you're willing to shoot does, and you express and inform them that you're educated about deer herd management, those can be really valuable pieces to add to the conversation.
Yeah, and like I said, I like to target properties that look like may need some help, may need some work. Farms are great places. Those guys are always, time is the most valuable thing to those people. So if you can offer your time, that's way more valuable than you paying them money. You know, so I always suggest offering your time, and then throughout that relationship, always be checking in. Always make sure you let them know when you're coming. Let them know what car you're driving. Let them know that you are the only person that you're going to bring onto this property unless you get permission otherwise. Make that clear up front. They like that. They appreciate that. And do what you say you're going to do. And after a while, you might come up with a really good friend with some nice property. But
and when they say yes, make sure you get that written permission. State of North Carolina demands it.
Yep.
All right. How about the next question from Colin?
I actually already popped in mine. I forgot about the wave your hand feature, so I'll let somebody else.
All right. How about Robert?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey Robert, how are you?
I'm doing good. You were talking about there's a difference between a doe bedding and the buck bedding.
Yeah.
Could you explain that more? Or I might have missed what you said it.
Yeah, so I didn't go over this too much for the sake of time. Does bed, does, as we know, can sometimes be a little bit easier to find. You see a lot more of them. They give you more doe tags. Bucks tend to get a little smarter. That's why I think people are, oh, I really want to get a buck. It's hard to get a buck, but they behave different. You won't typically see a big herd of deer with a bunch of does and like a bunch of bucks. What you'll see is bachelor groups of bucks, and you'll see groups of does. That's not by mistake. Bucks, especially when they get older, start to be very solitude. They like to keep to themselves. They realize that they're safer by themselves, even though, maybe a herd thinks safety is in numbers, more eyes. Bucks start to get smart, and they start to figure out that, yeah, bedding in the corn may be great, but there's a bunch of guys walking by it all the time, and I might just be the guy who gets caught. So they learn to really, really, really avoid people, and they will be in some of the nastiest, most, you wouldn't even, like, you know what I mean? You're like, there's no way I'm getting in there, ever, even if I wanted to, without maybe a bulldozer. So they tend to stick around the places that are really hard to get, and they tend to distance themselves a little bit. Now, the does might go bed in that corn right there. They might bed in that creek bottom. They might bed in somewhere that's a little bit more accessible, closer to the food, where the bucks will kind of distance themselves. So I would say that probably the biggest difference is the nastier the stuff, the more likely it's probably a buck. They'll go out of their way to be in some pretty gnarly stuff, and that's how they get smart. That's what they say. Big bucks get smart, not by being dumb. So
I would say both like the real thick and nasty argument definitely holds up. The other one that I think a lot of people overlook is where the doe bedding will almost always be somewhere where they're hidden. Does will very rarely, and that's because of the group mentality. Because they have a bunch of eyes and a bunch of ears in one area, they can pick up on danger a lot more readily and more with higher success rate. Bucks are much more likely to bed in a strategic location. Maybe that's an open hillside where they can see a good range around them, with some very thick cover only on one side of them. It's not uncommon. I jumped the biggest deer I saw all year this past season, literally just 5 feet off of a massive clear cut it was ankle high grass. And this buck was bedded down where he could see for almost a quarter mile for 180 degrees. And on the backside of him was super thick, loud, crunchy, nothing you could walk through kind of timber. And he knew that he could see really well. He was in a warm, comfortable place. He had the sun in his favor. There is a lot more strategy to that location than there is to the last place I think we busted some does out of on a deer drive was just literally in a hole. They were down in dark, thick brambles where you just can't get in there. And they know that, so that's why they were in there. But then their response is to run once you get too close. Whereas that buck, he's watching you walk up from a quarter mile away, and he's going to see you from a quarter mile away. And rather than getting scared and running away, he's just going to stand up and walk away. So a little bit different mentality, I think.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to get at is you're right, Andy. It is sometimes it's very single, secluded spots. I guess maybe is where you definitely made a better point on that, and that's kind of like when I mentioned the story of my father's friend seeing one on a ridge line. You're not going to see all of them sitting on that hillside.
Right. Yeah, but that buck will. Yeah, he knows.
He picked that spot.
Yep. He's got wind and all these things in his favor. Yeah. I think we're right at the 8:30 mark. So I will say I can hang out if there's any more questions, but I think Liz, if you want to let them wrap up and go, that's cool.
Yeah, I'll be around if there's more. So.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you guys coming, Andy and Evan both. And so you guys heard them say they'll be on for a little bit longer if anybody else has any questions. And Evan, if you could just go to the next slide real quick and we will wrap up. And so you guys will all be receiving a post-event email. Today was recorded, so we will have a recording of that everyone can watch on YouTube. We'll have another webinar 2 weeks from now, so you'll receive a link where you can register for that. And if you have any more questions or want any more information, the guys here from Opportunity Outdoors are happy to answer questions, but we also have New Hill Hunter Education and Mentoring Program, so you can check out their links and on Facebook. And then the Wildlife Federation, if you're ever interested in joining a local chapter or just getting involved in some conservation projects, check us out at ncwf.org. And so from here, if anybody else has got any more questions, we'll stay on for a little bit longer. For those of you who have to run, that is perfectly fine. And it looks like we have a question from Tom.
Hey guys, appreciate all of this. A lot. I just recently, and Evan and Andy, we've been in touch via email. I just recently bought land, and so a lot of what you said is spot on, especially with contacting a private landowner. I haven't been contacted yet about my land, but there's always lots of work to be done. I'll be digging fence posts this weekend, maintaining barbed wire lines, any of that kind of stuff.
Careful, Tom. I'm looking at about 30 names that might be.
I'm going to be up there this weekend.
Holes.
I'm going to be up there this weekend. You can welcome to join me. The other thing I want to call out is Onyx is awesome. I pay for one of the subscriptions, not Elite, but I will tell you it is not updated nearly as quickly as GIS. GIS updates about 3 or 4 months after closing. So I just say if you come into agreement with somebody on that private land, check out the GIS scope of their plot, because Onyx still has 10 more acres than I own on it right now. And lastly, you guys talk about tick and chiggers. They are real out there. Over the summer doing work on our land, countless ticks and chiggers, and the permethrin is the Sawyer's brand you had up there is great stuff, and use it on your clothing, not your body. And it works well, and it works well on clothing that you buy off the shelf rather than buying permethrin treated. Just lessons learned for everybody. The permethrin treated stuff works great, but it's much cheaper to treat your own clothing than purchasing crag hoppers, and there's a variety of other stuff out there, and I've done both. The question for you guys is, what brush pants do you guys use that is like affordable and not terrible to wear? Because the briars are out there, and that's where I've honestly found deer trails on my land, is going through some of that stuff, and it's miserable.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. I mean, you obviously correlated deer trails and briars. There's a reason, because you don't want to walk through it, and they can.
Yeah.
Andy's probably more versed in the brush pants because he upland hunts more than me.
Definitely an upland thing. So. What are those pants that you bought this year that you really like though, Evan?
I really like those Sitka ones. I mean, they're top of the line money, but I really enjoy them.
You've been liking them in the brush, you said.
Yeah, but I also wear the First Light guide pants. They have like a stretch to them, so they won't rip, but at the same time they tend to do well in that stuff. But I mean, again, you know me, Andy. I'll take all the cuts and just go through.
Yeah.
Like, full and
no, I hate walking through briars. It's like my least favorite thing about moving to the South is the brambles. But as a good friend recently pointed out, you got to learn to love them, because that's where all the blackberries are. So get used to it. My favorite pant, well, at least the ones I've been beating the crap out of for a while now, are just like the cheap Cabela's upland pant. They're like 2-layer, I think it's 500 or 800 diner Cordura fronted, and they're just all cotton, so they get real wet and gnarly, but they work good. But Tom, my recommendation would be to check out probably the Filson tin cloth and the double layered Filson tin cloth chaps. If you're in it a lot, and like you're going to be in it a lot, chaps are hands down the way to go. Heavy duty double layer chaps, very hard to beat.
Thanks, guys.
All right, very good. We've got a question from Justin.
Hi there. I don't have a question. Wanted to throw out there. I've worked in the past as a GIS tech. So if anyone, if the term GIS is foreign to you and you have no idea how to navigate it, I'd be happy to assist.
That's the guy we need for if all of us are going to start using Avenza. Justin is going to build custom Avenza maps for all of us. Thanks, Justin.
I feel like we have GIS, we've got some land people, we've got some new hunters, we've got everybody on here. So how about Drew? You have a question?
Yeah, I was going to just address the chaps and the briar clothing. I would recommend either Dan's or Mule clothing for that. You can get good breathable pants from Mule and chaps for really reasonable prices.
Very good. Thank you for that. Any other questions, comments?
Anybody want to go hunting?
I think everybody does, right? This was
please.
pretty motivating. Yeah. So if we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But thank you so much, Evan and Andy, and we look forward to talking to you guys in the future.
Thank you, Liz. We really appreciate it. And we
Thanks,
appreciate
everybody.
you signed on. Feel free again to reach out to us. We got some stuff coming down the line for turkey. I know this is a deer hunting webinar, but you want to talk turkeys, we would be happy to in any way. So keep an eye out for some of that stuff. We do some other stuff outside of deer. So yeah, we look forward to hopefully meeting you all once, and hopefully all of your great successes. So thank you.